as a new frontier opens in the space market. Some companies are trying to explore the possibilities of harvesting resources from the moon and other objects. Orbiting the Earth is a potential trillion-dollar payload of precious minerals and fuel sources, companies say, that could be used to power everyday electronic devices and cars.
The moon is really created from the same materials that Earth is created from.
And it's about exploration to gather those minerals and bring it back to Earth in an economically viable way.
But as investment in space startups reaches a record high, some scientists are skeptical that lunar mining could become a reality, questioning the high cost of space travel and the potential to destroy valuable geological sites. One company exploring the possibilities of extracting the moon's resources is Astrobotic. The startup is working with NASA to develop lunar lander and rover projects, which Astrobotic says could help unlock the moon's potential in the future. But those efforts face mounting challenges in the coming years.
Here we go.
This is The Business of Space, a series focusing on the innovative startups capitalizing on the commercial space industry. Pittsburgh was nicknamed the Steel City after its famed manufacturing industry. But now, technicians at Astrobotic want it to be reclaimed as a space hub. And that all starts with Peregrine, the lander set to travel to the moon later this year.
This is the actual flight article, and we're actually still completing the propulsion systems integration from the flight article.
It's part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload program.
That program is designed to contract with companies like ours to, again, deliver those payloads to the surface of the moon on robotic vehicles.
It could become the first American spacecraft to land on the moon since the last Apollo mission more than 50 years ago.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Peregrine will deliver technologies to be tested on the moon. If successful, they may be used in NASA's Artemis mission. That's the space agency's plan to return humans to the moon, with a view of potential inhabitation and construction on the lunar surface, including the building of a space camp.
Where we're at today is that we eventually want to build the infrastructure and capabilities to stay on the moon. And things like building habitats are dependent on finding where the resources are on the moon.
But some scientists say that establishing permanent bases would involve destroying large quantities of the lunar soil, which is called regolith, to make way for buildings. And that process could destroy clues as to how the moon, and by extension the Earth, formed.
So just moving all this terrain can eliminate that record of the impacts on the lunar surface that we have. But also the upper part of the lunar soil is like a record of what happened in the previous millions of years from the sun.
Companies such as Astrobotic and government agencies like NASA are interested in extracting from the regolith to try and understand the composition of its resources. Their aim is to facilitate continued exploration and economic development in space. Scientists have previously discovered a variety of minerals and elements on the moon that could be used to support that goal.
We can find their oxygen in high quantities, that it will be very helpful for life support system or for propellant and fuel. We also can find water ice in the lunar poles, that also it's very useful for survival of humans. We can find other minerals and other elements like silicon, metals, rare earth elements that we can use to fabricate things that we need to use there on the lunar surface.
But some engineers are skeptical of the possibilities of extracting usable material in a space environment, as many technologies are still in development. A lunar mining operation would have to make use of an unprecedented amount of innovative tools, with automated or remote control machinery and pumps that require minimal human oversight. And there are financial limitations to harvesting those resources for use on Earth. The cost of fueling trips to and from the lunar surface is not currently economically viable, some researchers say. Payloads traveling in the Peregrine lander can be bought by private companies, investors, or government agencies such as NASA. The U.S. Space Agency has commissioned Astrobotic to work on a series of rovers as payloads, small robots that will travel across the surface of the moon and conduct scientific experiments. One of those being developed here is the Cube rover.
Cube rovers can be used for lots of different missions and applications. One of the ones that we're really excited about here is that we have rovers that can drive several kilometers, survive lunar nights, using small platforms that are orders of magnitude cheaper than prior rovers in the past. Allows us to scan the surface of the moon in a much more affordable and less complex way, so that we can understand where the resources are located. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens with smaller rovers that we're learning more about compared to larger rovers, and that the smaller rovers actually float on top of the surface. So your wheel designs for these smaller rovers are likely going to be very different than some of the larger rovers.
But there are lots of challenges associated with engineering robotics to work on the lunar surface.
The lunar surface have really extreme temperatures and really high variation of temperatures, so that is a challenge for the subsistence of the rovers and the robotics elements. But also the terrain, it has a huge amount of dust that is really abrasive and corrosive, and it can damage the subsystems. Also radiation, the radiation can play an impact on especially in the electronics of the system.
As many startups race to capitalize on the moon, engineers and scientists say there are limitations and consequences. One of them is the potential damage to the environment.
There are drawbacks to going to the moon permanently. Some examples include leaving our assets behind on the surface, or disrupting maybe the far side of the moon, which is totally undisturbed right now. It's looked at as one of the locations in our solar system where you could look deep into space and have no interruptions, no noise, background noise that can influence your observations.
But given the environmental costs of mining the Earth, some say that the moon's resources could help reduce damage at home. Companies such as Astrobotic say those potential benefits outweigh the risk of disrupting the moon's natural ecosystem.
I think that the ability to harvest resources and use them to protect our own planet is incredibly helpful.
Other scientists are more skeptical that the moon could in turn help protect the Earth. But one point they can agree on is that establishing bases on the moon for human visitation could be decades away, and harvesting resources could take even longer. For now, looking for clues in the regolith is the first step.